Laissez-faire is the philosophy of economic freedom and is a French term meaning, let do, or leave alone, embodies the principle of minimal government intervention in economic affairs. Rooted in the belief that individuals and businesses thrive best when left to operate freely in the marketplace, laissez-faire is a cornerstone of classical economics. It advocates for the supremacy of market forces, arguing that supply, demand, and competition are the most effective regulators of economic activity. The concept has shaped economic policies, inspired political movements, and stirred debates about the role of the state in society. However, this idea is rooted in a faulty premise, the idea that private enterprise was consistent with the principles of a free market. Laissez-faire is not merely an economic model. It is a philosophy of governance and societal organization. At its heart lies the conviction that freedom, both personal and economic, is paramount. The system champions the idea that the invisible hand of the market, a term popularized by economist Adam Smith, naturally guides resources to their most efficient uses, fostering innovation, efficiency, and prosperity. In a laissez-faire economy, the government refrains from imposing tariffs, subsidies, price controls, or regulations. Instead, its role is limited to protecting property rights, enforcing contracts, and ensuring a stable legal framework. However, this view of a laissez-faire system is predicated on the pre-existence of capitalism, when in fact it ought to be a critique of the free enterprise system. The origins of laissez-faire can be traced to the economic thinkers of the Enlightenment era. The term itself is credited to French merchants during the reign of King Louis XIV. When asked how the government could assist their business activities, the merchants famously replied, "Laissez-nous faire," or "leave us alone." This sentiment resonated with intellectuals who sought to challenge the mercantilist policies prevalent at the time, where governments heavily regulated trade and commerce to accumulate national wealth. But once more we see a presupposition which contradicts with the proposition. Given capitalists the one thing the state cannot do, is let them alone. Possibly the man most to blame with the association of the free market with capitalism is the father of capitalist thought, Adam Smith. Adam Smith, a Scottish philosopher and economist, is no doubt the father of classical economics. In his seminal work The Wealth of Nations, 1776, Smith articulated the principles of free markets and the invisible hand. He argued that individuals, driven by self-interest, inadvertently promote societal well-being by producing goods and services efficiently. Smith believed that the pursuit of profit leads to innovation and competition, which in turn benefit consumers through better products and services at lower prices. This is true but incompatible with the system he wanted to see implemented, the free enterprise system of capitalism. The laissez-faire he used to justify capitalism was never compatible with capitalism. Smith championed limited government intervention, asserting that its primary functions should be maintaining law and order, providing public goods that the private sector cannot efficiently supply, such as defense and infrastructure, and protecting property rights. His ideas laid the foundation for modern economics and influenced generations of policymakers and theorists. What he did was champion the power of the rich over the rights of the poor, to the detriment of both. One of the most eloquent proponents of laissez-faire among the French, was Frédéric Bastiat, a 19th-century French economist and writer. Bastiat's works, particularly The Law, 1850, and Economic Sophisms, are celebrated for their clarity and wit in defending free markets. He argued that government intervention often leads to unintended consequences, distorting economic incentives and harming both producers and consumers. But if government intervention leads to unintended consequences, perhaps the most notable is the preservation of capitalism, which could not exist without the intervention of governments. Bastiat's famous parable of the broken window illustrates the fallacy that destruction stimulates economic growth. He emphasized that true prosperity arises from voluntary exchange and individual freedom, not from artificial stimulation or state interference. Bastiat's writings remain an essential resource for advocates of laissez-faire and libertarian thought. Another British writer promoting free market ideas was John Stuart Mill. Mill was a notable British philosopher and economist, who contributed significantly to the intellectual underpinnings of laissez-faire. In his work, Principles of Political Economy, 1848, Mill supported the idea of free markets while acknowledging practical limitations. He argued that while laissez-faire is ideal for economic organization, certain social issues, such as education, poverty, and public health, may necessitate limited government intervention. Mill's balanced approach made him a key figure in reconciling pure laissez-faire with the realities of societal needs. Laissez-faire as a philosophy has had profound implications on global economic development. During the 19th century, it influenced the industrialization of Britain, the United States, and other Western nations. The absence of restrictive regulations allowed entrepreneurs to innovate, leading to rapid technological advancements and economic growth. Notable examples include the rise of industries such as railroads, steel, and textiles during the Industrial Revolution. However, the unbridled application of laissez-faire principles also led to challenges, such as exploitative labor practices, environmental degradation, and economic inequality. These issues prompted debates about the need for government oversight to balance the pursuit of profit with societal welfare. This is merely to say that laissez-faire policies when applied to the lower economic strata are a disaster for society as a whole. If we are to have free markets, they must be free for all, not just the working class. Despite its merits, laissez-faire is not without criticism. Detractors argue that unfettered markets can result in monopolies, unequal wealth distribution, and social injustice. The Great Depression of the 1930s is often cited as a failure of laissez-faire policies, leading to widespread unemployment and economic stagnation. Critics contend that markets do not always self-correct and that government intervention is necessary to stabilize economies during crises. Economist John Maynard Keynes challenged laissez-faire orthodoxy in his work The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, 1936. Keynes argued that active government involvement in economic affairs, particularly through fiscal and monetary policies, is essential to prevent recessions and stimulate growth. In the modern era, laissez-faire continues to influence economic thought and policy. Countries like Hong Kong have embraced free market principles, achieving remarkable economic success. However, most nations adopt a mixed approach, combining elements of laissez-faire with government regulation to address social and environmental concerns. The rise of globalization, technological innovation, and digital markets has reignited discussions about the balance between market freedom and state intervention. Advocates of laissez-faire argue that deregulation fosters entrepreneurship and competitiveness, while critics caution against its potential to exacerbate inequality and undermine public welfare. Both are right because they speak of different things. Free markets do promote civilization and progress, but capitalism promotes inequality and the concentration of wealth. Laissez-faire is more than an economic model, it is a philosophy that champions individual freedom and the power of the market. It has shaped the course of economic history and sparked enduring debates about the role of government. While its purest form may be impractical in a capitalist society, the principles of laissez-faire are still relevant. What is needed is a concept that incorporates the idea of laissez-faire economics while disallowing the capitalist usurpation of the idea. We cannot have private enterprise championing the idea of a free market, when that is not what they mean. Capitalists want a market not regulated for them but regulated for the poor and working classes. Private owners want their property protected, by government, whatever the cost. Agora is a Greek term for a marketplace. Co-joined with krasi, which indicates rule or governance, we create a term that suggests the market holds supreme power. An agorocracy is a system in which the free market exclusively governs economic and social outcomes, with all decisions, production, pricing, distribution, and even societal functions, determined by supply, demand, and voluntary exchange, absent any government intervention. Indeed, the government, such as it is part of the market. The agorocracy is governed by those who make decisions regarding supply and demand, what we understand as the businesses of the agorocracy. In an agorocracy, businesses and individuals dictate resource allocation, and no state regulations, subsidies, or controls exist to interfere. But there are no business interests that conflict with societal interests. So, in an agorocracy there is nothing for the state to regulate. There are no competing interests which need to be mediated. Agorocracy conveys a sense of a place where the rule of the market exists, paralleling terms like democracy, rule by the people, or plutocracy, rule by the wealthy, while making clear it is the market itself that dictates societal direction. Agorocracy derivatives include agorocrat, agorocratics, agorocratism, agorocratist and agorocratize. Coupled with agorocracy is agoraphobia. This is the fear of open markets and the supply/demand equation. Parasites do not to be linked to a system in which one has to get to give. Quid pro quo is anathema to them. Once we understand agoraphobia, we understand all we need to know about the problems of the world. When one is not tied to a market or the mechanisms of the market, there is no order. If there is no order, there is no intelligence, nor even sentience. Sentience requires order, or what others call predictability. If there is no logic to reality, there is no way to make predictions. If we cannot predict the future or outcomes, we cannot reason. The market is not merely a cultural artifact or artifice. The market permits us to plan progress and to devise a way to develop societies. It is peoples who reject the free market the most who are never able to develop. Agoraphobia is the undiagnosed illness that explains everything. Because if you as a people reject the discipline of the market as an agoraphobia, which is a fear of free markets or a hatred of being subject to the laws of supply and demand, you will not be able to civilize. If you are civilized or living in a civil society, you will be lawless. But what is more, if you are inherently predisposed to seek to disrupt or defeat the mechanisms of the market, you will lack scientific rigor. There are innumerable consequences of not having a mind that embraces the laws of supply and demand. The humanities are well known for their narrative and anecdotal nature. Quantification is just one more element in a free market. Indeed, a free market could be considered to be little more than a system by which trades are given a quantifiable index. This system of measurement being called money. It ought to be understood that if what we do has value, then this value ought to be measurable. When we look at the humanities, psychology for example, we observe much that is narrative, and the quantification that exists is primarily statistical analysis. However, when we look at human behavior, it is all of two basic types. Either the person is an agorocrat and works for what he or she gets, or he or she is an agoraphobe and avoids costs like the plague. That is, an agoraphobe does not accept any charge to their accounts that they can externalize onto others. Thus, even in psychology, the behavior of a person can be accounted for depending on whether the behavior adds value or diminishes value. The behavior of fathers who do not care for their kids is costly both for the families so impacted and society in general. In this instance at least, we do not just have to record the incidence of fatherless families, we can record the cost of this on society. We can adjust the value of the family in terms of the impact a man has on it by abandoning his responsibilities.